Now we come to the next topic, that is the type of the negotiable instruments. Generally, there are three type of negotiable instruments which are being covered under the Negotiable Instrument Act 1881. One is the promissory note, second is the bill of exchange, and third is the checks. We will discuss all these three in detail in further slides. So let's start with the first one, that is the promissory note. Promissory note is defined under section 4 of Negotiable Instrument Act, which says that promissory note is what? It is an instrument in writing containing an unconditional undertaking signed by the maker to pay a certain sum of money only to or to the order of a certain person or to the bearer of the instrument. So this is a very defined definition given under section 4. So let's discuss this definition in detail also. This is an instrument in writing. That means these words shows that the promissory note should be in writing containing an unconditional undertaking. That means the negotiable instrument must contain an unconditional undertaking. There should not be any condition involved in it. It must be signed by the maker. That means the promissory note must be signed by the maker of that instrument to pay a certain sum of money. So here the signatures should be regarding to pay a certain sum of money to whom? That is only to or to order of a certain person or to the bearer of the instrument. Bearer here means the holder of the instrument. So here next we discuss about the parties of the negotiable instrument, parties of the promissory notes. The person who promises to pay is called the maker of the promissory note, and the person to whom payment is to be made is called the payee of the promissory note. There are a few examples. Like first example is, I promise to pay B or order rupees 500. So this is the valid wording of the promissory note. That is, I promise to pay B or order. Or order means the person to whom it would be endorsed rupees 500. I acknowledge myself to be indebted to be in rupees 1000 to be paid on demand for value received. This is again a valid example of the valid promissory note. Now there are a few essentials of a promissory note. One, it must be in writing. So as the basic feature of the negotiable instrument, that every negotiable instrument should be in writing, this is again the feature of the promissory note. Where verbal promise to do or will not be a promissory note. Mean in absence of writing, it would not be a valid promissory note. It may be noted on any paper or on book or any substitute for paper. That means there is no set paper type on which it is to be mentioned. It may be on book, it may be on paper, or any substitute for the paper. Substitute for paper includes any kind of printing, any kind of photography, or the lithography. The second essential is the promise to pay must be expressed. That means there must be the express contract, express agreement to pay for the specified money. A mere acknowledgement of debt, that means I am just saying that I have taken this much amount from other, does not make any kind of promissory note. A mere acknowledgement of debt without express promise to pay is not a promissory note. That means in every promissory note, there must be acknowledgement of debt, or with that acknowledgement, there must be a promise to pay to that promissory note. A mere implied promise will not be a promissory note. Let's see the example. I have borrowed rupees 1000 from Mr. X and I am accountable to him for the same does not include any undertaking or promise to pay, because in this example there is an acknowledgement that I have borrowed rupees 1000 from Mr. X and I am accountable to him, but there is no promise that I would pay rupees 1000 to Mr. X. So in absence of that promise, this cannot be said that this is a valid promissory note. The third essential is the promise to pay must be unconditional. That means when any person is making the promise to other person to pay a specified amount, it should not be conditional. The promise to pay must not depend upon the happening of any contingency. Unconditional promissory note is not negotiable and hence invalid. So that means any promissory note which is depending upon the happening of a contingency would not make it valid. Like a promise to pay when able or as soon as possible is conditional, and in these cases if these kind of words are being used, these are not valid promissory notes. The promise to pay does not become conditional if it is regarding a particular place or a specific time or on happening of an event which must happen. So if it is regarding that the promissory note would be the payment for the money should be given at a particular place, this is not conditional. On some specific time, this is not conditional. And if even if there is an event included which must happen, so all in these cases it would not be treated as the conditional promise. So let's see the example. A promise to pay, A promise to pay rupees 500 7 days after the death of B is not conditional, for it is certain that B will die, though the exact time of his death is uncertain. So B will definitely die on one day. So when he will die, A would pay rupees 500 7 days after his death. So this is a valid promissory note. A written promise to pay a sum of money within so many days after the marriage of the maker was not recognized as a promissory note because the maker may never marry. Because the to get married or not to get married, it may be certain or it is totally uncertain event, because a person to avoid the payment may not get married, but as in the previous example the death is a certain event. That means in case of a certain event, this would not be treated as a conditional promise, but where the event is not certain, means it's not a must happening event, in that case it would not be a valid promissory note. The next essential is it must be signed by the maker. Signature of the maker on the face of the note is very essential. As we have read in the basic characteristics of a negotiable instrument, that the maker should sign it. So the sign on the face of the promissory note is the essential condition. Signing means writing one's name on some document or some paper. Signature, it is not required that signature should be at the foot or any particular place of the promissory note. It may be a thumb mark, initial, or any other mark which is recognized by the Negotiable Instrument Act 1881. But when the person is a literate person, he can understand, he can sign, he can read, he can write, there the thumb mark would not be considered as a sufficient one. The thumb mark would be considered valid only in case when the person is totally illiterate, he don't know how to read and write. Next is the maker must be certain. The maker of the promissory note must be the definite one who has made it. There must be some identity of the person which should be known to the other parties. It must be shown on its face the person who is liable as a maker, means the person who is going to make the payment in future. It must be shown on the face of the promissory note. Sufficient indication about his identity should be there. Sufficient indication means the name of the person or the name of the company must be mentioned on the face of the promissory note, and may it also be in the form of the designation like CEO of company ABC. So this is also sufficient identification of the maker. That means any kind of identity of the maker, either with his own name, either with the name of the company, or with the designation of the maker, must be mentioned on the face of the promissory note to make it a valid promissory note. There must be two or there may be two or more makers of a promissory note. Means two persons can jointly make a promissory note. Let's see the example. A note signed A or else B is not invalid. It is good against A and B, but B would become liable only on default by A. That means when the two persons assign the same promissory note, it is always considered valid, but the first prime responsibility of payment would be of the first person, and in case of default by the first party, then the second party would be liable to pay for the same. The next essential is promise must be to pay a certain sum. Means the payment which is to be made in future, that must be certain and definite. The promised must be to pay a certain sum and nothing else. That means, let's see the example. A promised to pay rupees 2000 and such other sums as may be due would not make a promissory note valid because the amount promised is uncertain. Means where the total amount is uncertain or a part of the total is uncertain, it would not make a note a valid promissory note. As in this case, as in this example, A has promised to pay rupees 2000 and other sums. So other sums is a totally vague term. It is totally uncertain term. So where the terms are not certain, not definite, it would not be a valid promissory note. The promise should be to pay money and money only. That means anything else in lieu of money would not make a note as a valid promissory note. The medium of payment should be money and only money. It should not include any kind of bonds, any kind of bills or any other article at the in lieu of money. Let's see the example. An instrument signed by A saying, I promise to pay rupees 500 and to deliver to him my black horse on 1st January. So this is not a valid promissory note, because in this case promise is not to pay money only but to do something else also apart from that. Here one party is saying that he will give rupees 500 as well as the black horse. So this there is something else involved except the money in the agreement. So this something else will make the promissory note invalid. So that means the promise should be to pay money and nothing else. The next point is the pay must be certain. Pay is a person to whom the promise is to be made. That means the person who is going to receive the money should be the certain person, and that person should be capable of being receive the payment. The pay should be certain on the face as already being mentioned, but it should be mentioned on the face of the instrument at the time of the execution of the instrument. And same as in the case of the payer, the drawer, the maker, the name, the designation or the name of the company can be valid points, valid names on the face of the promissory note to make it a valid instrument. A promissory note payable to several individuals can never be considered as a valid instrument, because if there is an involvement of several receivers, then to whom the payment was made is not clear. It makes the terms of the promissory note totally uncertain. So it is not a valid instrument. The maker and the person who is to receive the payment cannot be the one and the same person. That means the person who is making the promise and the person to whom promise is being made to pay a certain sum of amount cannot be the same. They should be two different persons. But in case of a bank note or a currency note, they are not the promissory note, because in these cases both of them are treated as money itself. Next feature is the other formalities. Other formalities like number, place, date, attestation, etc. are usually found in the promissory note, but they are not essential in law. Basically, these things are being added to make it more convenient and to perform it in a desired manner. These are not essential to the validity of a promissory note, but a promissory note must be properly stamped under the Indian Stamp Act. That means under the Indian Stamp Act, if any specified authenticated stamp is required, without that stamp, any promissory note cannot be considered as a valid promissory note. It may be payable on demand or after a definite period of time. That means where no time is mentioned on the promissory note, it is payable on demand. Payable on demand means the time when the payee wants to have the payment, he can show it to the maker. Next, this is a specimen form of the promissory note. We can see here. It is very clear that the place is mentioned on the top, that is Patiala. The date is mentioned 15th July 2002. That means it is a date on which it was being created, it was being framed. So the wording on demand, I promise to pay Mr. X, Y or order rupees 2000 with interest at 8% per annum for value received. That means here one promisor is making the promise to pay rupees 2000 Mr. XY or on the order of Mr. XY, and the amount is there, the 2000 rupees, which is the requirement that it should be only in the monetary form, that is present there. And at last the stamp, the place for stamp is there. That means all the essential things, that means a specified place, the date on which it is being made, the amount is certain, the parties are certain, to whom the payment is being made, that is certain, and stamp and signature, everything is being mentioned in this specimen of a promissory note. So if all these things are available in any promissory note, it makes it as a valid promissory